Good afternoon, everyone. This is Ron Patel at the Municipal Climate Change Action Center. Thanks for joining on today's webinar. I think I'm just going to wait a couple minutes to catch some stragglers. I see there are a few of you on time, so that's great to see, but just give it a couple minutes to see the list fill out here. Okay, everyone, it's 2:02, so we'll get started on today's webinar. Thanks for joining today as we talk about setting emission reduction targets and climate action planning in today's webinar. So before we get going, I just wanted to start by acknowledging that this presentation is being presented to you from both Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territory. I wanted to start by acknowledging all of the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries and whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant communities. A little bit about the Action Center, if you aren't familiar with us. We provide funding, technical assistance, and education to support Alberta municipalities interested in addressing climate change. The Municipal Climate Change Action Center is a partnership between the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association, the Rural Municipalities of Alberta, as well as the Government of Alberta. So for today, I'm going to start by just giving a brief overview of the Partners for Climate Protection Program, as this webinar is a PCP delivery. And then we'll move into the bulk of today's topics around emission reduction targets and climate action plans. And then our guest today, Devin LaFlèche from the Town of Cochrane, will be joining us to give us an overview of some climate action initiatives happening in Cochrane. And if you do have questions, I'd encourage you to type them into the Q&A box on the side, and we'll probably save them to be addressed at the end of the presentation. Perfect. So the PCP program, or the Partners for Climate Protection Program, provides a 5-milestone framework that helps municipal governments take action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The program itself is a nationwide program. There are 400 municipalities all across the country, each of which have committed to taking action on climate change through the program. And it's through PCP they also receive technical support, guidance, training, tools, various resources to help them with their commitments. And we've also been working to leverage networking and peer-to-peer learning between our member municipalities. The program itself is a joint initiative between FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, as well as ICLEI Canada. And it is the Canadian component of ICLEI's Cities for Climate Protection, or CPP, International Network. Here in Alberta, the Action Center supports the program as the regional climate advisor. So we talked a little bit about how there are 5 milestones. You can see them each here. The framework is really there to support municipal governments to take long-lasting action on climate change. I mentioned that today's webinar will cover Milestone 2, setting emission reduction targets, and Milestone 3, developing a local action plan. If you do want to learn more about creating greenhouse gas emission inventories, we did do a webinar back on April of this year, so you can go view that recording. Or feel free to get in touch with myself or anyone on the PCP contact list. So we'll jump right into greenhouse gas reduction targets. I just wanted to start by saying that setting targets is a strong way to communicate commitment to climate action. It can show residents and businesses in your municipality leadership on climate action. Also kind of want to underline the fact that setting a target is a real foundational step. It's important as it allows us to kind of create a long-term system for climate action. And that by stating a target and a time frame to reach that reduction, you'll have a goal to guide your initiatives, but also a goal that can be used to report on progress. Typically, greenhouse gas reduction targets have 3 elements to them. You can see them here. The first one is a percentage reduction. This is just a percentage that the emissions will be reduced by. The second aspect is the base year. This is the year that is being compared to, and the target year is the other aspect of that, which is the year that the reduction will be achieved by. We can take all 3 elements of the targets and put them together to kind of a blanket statement, which goes the percentage reduction from base year by target year. So those are all 3 components there, and we can see an example of this at a national level. So the government of Canada has set its national emissions reduction targets to 30% below 2005 base levels by 2030. If you do want to learn a little bit more about the national targets and what's included in that, you can read all about it in the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change. I've included a link here in the slides, so you can follow up on that. Okay, so I kind of want to talk a little bit about methods, but before we do that, I just wanted to mention a little bit more about inventories. So creating a greenhouse gas reduction target really is a follow-up step from Milestone 1 or having the inventory. So I would encourage folks to learn a little bit more about inventories in our previous webinar recording or the resource material. But that really is the first step, and then we move into target setting. So now that we're on Milestone 2, there really are kind of 2 primary methods of thinking about how to set our greenhouse gas reduction targets, and that's having a top-down method or a bottom-up method. And that terminology really refers to the order in which the targets and the actions are being developed. So in a top-down method, the target is first set, and then we'd follow up by having action planning and analysis for that target. This kind of methodology is very useful if we want to align with other targets, other jurisdictions, the provincial or federal targets. We just saw that 30% reduction, so that might be a good place to start, and you just set your target to 30% to match what the federal government is doing. So you can kind of see how using this methodology, we can have pretty aggressive targets, but they're also very quickly created. There's very low development cost. You can spend a low amount of dollars, but also time on just setting a target. So this is a good method for that. We just simply select the target and then create the plan around that target. On kind of the flip side of that is a bottom-up method. So this is when a target is chosen by identifying climate actions and their emission reduction potentials. So we kind of go backwards in this case, and we create a target that is more certain. It might also align better with some other policies, plans, or actions that your municipality may already have in place. Again, the downside here is kind of the flip of the top-down method, is that we do have to spend a large amount of time doing analysis and modeling, which has the time or costs associated to it. Before we move away from this slide, I just wanted to kind of take some time and suggest that there should be a consideration placed on how aspects of both methodologies, of both the top-down and the bottom-up, can coexist. So I would just like to stress that it is important to kind of realize that setting or selecting a top-down method doesn't mean that we just pick the target in a void. We can improve upon a target by understanding things like the local context, what are our influencing factors, are there external issues, which is a little bit different than doing that timely or costly analysis of a bottom-up target. So I guess that kind of leads to the question, what is a good reduction target? I would say, qualitatively, there are some aspects that we want to try and achieve. So a strong target should be realistic, it should be achievable, it should be meaningful, while balancing all that with the need for significant action on climate change. And so the Partners for Climate Protection program does offer some recommendations on targets for both corporate and community scale emissions. So for corporate emissions, the suggestion is 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions for municipal operations within a 10-year timeline. This type of target focuses more on the impacts of internal operations and contracted services, things that the municipal government has a direct control over. The complementary side to that is the community emission targets. So the suggestion here is a 6% reduction for greenhouse gas emissions within the entire municipality, again, in a 10-year time period. So this is really a larger scale statement really on municipal commitment to climate action. But the progress on climate action is not only just our municipal operations, but it also includes residents, businesses, other stakeholders, other local stakeholders that are a source of emissions. So we're gonna break up corporate and community targets into separate sections here, and we're going to talk a little bit about some influencing factors that go into setting targets for each. So for corporate reduction targets, a big thing are talking about our municipal assets. In most cases, existing assets will produce bulk of the emissions for years to come. And that's something that we can find out in our greenhouse gas inventory and our forecasting to confirm. But in most cases, that will be one of the most important aspects of corporate targets. So we want to consider things like the age and condition of assets. Will older buildings, will older vehicles, older infrastructure be replaced? If so, there is an opportunity to really have a huge reduction in energy consumption. So that'll influence our target. But if they're not ready to be replaced, older buildings can be retrofitted to increase efficiency. But ones that are more new, it might be difficult to find a retrofit that makes sense. Age also applies to our fleet vehicles. Should they be replaced with more efficient options? And I guess with assets goes the idea about being aware of any impending changes or any planned changes to the assets. You need to think about, are there new facilities that will be increasing emissions? Are there existing facilities that will be closed and therefore decrease emissions? We also want to think a little bit about if there are new assets that are planned, but they're not yet confirmed, it actually creates a window of opportunity. Can we influence that change to create a more efficient option to reduce our emissions? We also want to think a little bit about what is actually within our ownership and operations. There is a very diverse range of municipal government assets, and your assets might be owned by a CRO, a community-related organization. Maybe you have a contract with a waste management company. There are a lot of kind of blurred lines on ownership and operations, so we do need to understand the emissions that these assets produce and if we can actually influence them. The second major area to think about in terms of influencing factors is budget. I'm sure most of you would agree that the budget is probably the single largest factor in determining how much corporate emissions can be reduced. So I would advise here to kind of include any understanding that we have of implementation costs for climate action initiatives so that the appropriate funds can be budgeted for these initiatives. With that in mind, it's important to kind of understand or be aware that while local governments they have to bear the direct cost of reducing emissions. There's also an opportunity to benefit from the initiatives and having a lower energy bill and lower operating costs. So those calculations can be very helpful to kind of guide your initiatives. It can be used to help persuade management or council that the investments in reducing corporate emissions are worthwhile. Typically, from a life cycle perspective, savings from carbon or energy management practices are very cost effective, so this can be a good strategy to include. The last part with budgets is to kind of be aware of what available grants or funding programs are open. That can be a crucial part of kind of developing a target and then prioritizing your actions within that target. So we can also look at some influencing factors for community targets. This will help us kind of frame our target for these larger scale communities emissions. So one of the things that we want to think about is the community form. How does our density, do we have a urban core or are we a low density community? How does that affect how does that impact the effectiveness of various climate actions? How do things like geography and climate impact this scale of changes? We also want to look at various socioeconomic concerns. Will the growth rate of our town change and impact the emissions profile? What about other demographics like types of employment or the family size, or do we have an aging population? Those can all be important factors on your targets. We talked about this a little bit with the corporate reduction targets, but there's also concern here around the spheres of influence. So again, that's the same. Municipal governments do have a significant control over things like land use planning. That includes like sizes and types of buildings, waste management typically, as well as influence on things like transit. Is transit viable? How do people get around in our municipal governments or in our municipalities? Is there active transportation rates? What does the vehicle use look like? These things can all impact our target, but we also have areas, things like building code or highways or like industrial. Those are all kind of fall into provincial or federal jurisdictions, and we don't have a lot of impact on those areas. The last kind of main influencing factor to kind of consider or at least be aware of are technological and social changes. So this one is more of an awareness piece. So as an example, the recent years have seen solar photovoltaics and now increasingly so electric vehicles increase in demand. So that naturally has a change with the emissions profile. So we do have to kind of consider that impact with our targets. And then social change is also an aspect of that. There's lots of indication that there is a growing concern and growing awareness over climate change from the general public. So how do we incorporate that into our targets as well? So for those members joining today that want a little bit more information on what is needed from the program to complete Milestone 2, we do ask that you submit two things. The first is a description of your targets, if it's a corporate or community target, and all three aspects that we talked about. So what's the baseline year, the target year, and your actual percentage change from baseline. And then we also want to see a council resolution that adopts those targets that are set. So we want to see what your goal is, and then an actual commitment to that goal. So as we've kind of been discussing Milestone 2, you may have kind of realized, or you may have come into this realizing, that target setting is very closely related to creating action plans. But we'll talk about milestone 3 now in a little bit more of a discrete way. So an action plan really is a commitment from the municipality to reducing emissions, and developing an implementation plan to achieve those commitments. So really, we're trying to define a scope of action here, as well as providing a benchmark to which we can measure our progress against. So I'll also kind of maybe highlight that lots of plans also tie in impacts and vulnerabilities that are emerging from a changing climate. So we're focusing on climate mitigation, but there's also an opportunity to talk about climate adaptation action pieces in a plan as well. In our experience, municipal governments are quite varied in their plans. Some choose to create a dedicated climate change plan. Other governments choose to kind of nest climate mitigation and adaptation actions into existing plans or other strategic documents. There is kind of positives and cons with both. And we want to make sure that we are integrating climate change actions with existing departments and strategic planning. But how you develop your local action plan really depends on your local priorities, your local context, and how your local government kind of functions. But the plan nonetheless will guide you on addressing climate change. Also wanted to kind of highlight how emission reduction initiatives also, our focus here is to mitigate impacts of climate change, but we also can create both economic and quality of life benefits. So our targets and plans all focus on emissions, but there is an opportunity to include things like energy cost savings, more qualitative actions like diversifying our local economy, improving air quality. Aspects like that can all be included in the plan. And then sharing a plan publicly or corporately is also an opportunity to kind of learn from other folks that are making plans and network with other municipal governments that take action on climate change. So a little bit about an action plan, trying to take the diversity of them and break them into some common elements. There are really around 3 common elements that we've kind of see show up over and over again. The first is a policy or a statement of commitment about working towards that target. And then the other 2 are really the details. So the strategies really detail the approaches that are being taken, and then those details on actions describe what is being implemented to accomplish the strategy. So details can include what specific tasks exist, who will it be done by, and what is actually being done. Might include the time, so when will this be done by, or it might include the resource allocation, so what specific funds or departments are available for each specific activity. So really, I was trying to put together a way to kind of display a structure of a plan, but it does vary a lot. So, and that kind of reflects the purpose of a document. In some cases, it reflects who the audience is. You may have a forward-facing audience, a forward-facing document for a public audience, and a separate internal one. Or you might have a standalone plan versus a part of a larger plan. So the Action Center does have a list of municipal governments that have publicly available climate action plans. So I would encourage you to find that list on our Action Center, on our Learning Center part of our websites, or follow up on this link when you do receive the slides. Devin will talk a little bit about the Town of Cochrane's plan and initiatives, but there are a lot of options for structuring and displaying a plan. With that being said, there are some suggestions on what to include in a local action plan, so we'll just kind of go through those point by point. The first would be to make sure that you kind of describe the rationale for addressing climate change issues, something like a business case for climate change action. You could focus on highlighting green economic growth or competitiveness. You could even draw from the PCP overall goals and project objectives to help you, in your unique situation. With that, I would also encourage you to kind of have a breakdown of emissions. So kind of take the time to illustrate and describe your municipal government's emissions by sector or by source as it pertains to operations or community, whichever plan we're working on. Another suggestion is to state the emissions forecast. And this kind of helps with the emission reduction targets that the municipal government has set or may adopt, as well as a rationale for, this is where we're heading if we don't take action. The second last suggestion here is to summarize our actions. They may be qualitative or quantitative, but just providing a summary can be a very accessible way to share what's being done. And you can include, if you have education or outreach programs that you plan to deliver here as well. And then the last suggestion really is to make sure that we link actions in the plan to a time frame, to someone who is responsible, or to a financial resource. We want to make sure that these actions don't kind of get left at the bottom of someone's desk, and that there is a commitment to completing them. So for those of you that are maybe wondering about what the PCP program would like to see for completing this milestone, there are 4 different requirements. The first is just a description of planned activities to achieve that reduction target. Here, the PCP secretary is pretty flexible. They're happy to see a written report, but if you prefer to have a presentation or even like your website detailing your plan, that is pretty flexible with us. We want to see a description of how public or internal stakeholders are participating in the development of a plan. Doing stakeholder engagement is an important aspect of any plan, climate change or not, so we make sure we get that done. We want to see a description of costs and funding sources. Again, that's attaching that kind of responsibility or commitment to actually doing the actions. And we also want to see, in a similar lens, we also want to see identification of the municipal department or organizations that are responsible for the plan or for individual actions that are outlined in the plan. So my voice is starting to hurt, which is a good clue to give it over to our guest today. So thank you, Devin LaFleche, who is a special projects planner at the Town of Cochrane, for joining us today. He'll take us through a couple slides on Cochrane.
Perfect, thanks, Roddy. I will just throw it over to take control. Let me know if you can see my screen. Are you good? Ron, can you see my screen?
Yeah, it looks good, Devin. We're just on the PowerPoint. So
on the PowerPoint, perfect.
Yeah, maybe if you switch to presenter view here.
There we go. So I'm Devin LaFleche, Special Projects Planner for the Town of Cochrane. What I'll be discussing today is first giving you just some context on where Cochrane is, what we're about, then going and explaining where we're at with our Partners for Climate Protection, or PCP program, then moving to our Municipal Energy Manager, or MEM program. I highly recommend the MEM program if you're a community based in Alberta. I don't just say that because I am the MEM for Cochrane, but we've seen a ton of success just in the first 6 months and really helping us get it back on track with our PCP program. Next, I'll discuss our engagement campaign that's tied to the MEM program, and then finally look at integrating the PCP and MEM programs to get the best results for both. So, innovative, bold, and dynamic, Cochrane is a community that creates its destiny by building on our proud heritage. That's a Western heritage Cochrane's based on. We have a population of just over 30,000. Our population has more than doubled in the last decade. We're often at the top of the list for fastest growing Canadian municipality. We're located 18 kilometers northwest of Calgary. We have a vibrant tech industry with 4i, MC Things, and the national headquarters for Garmin. We are a bedroom community with over 50% of our residents working in Calgary. So we still have that, but we're trying to grow that tech industry, as well as we have a bit of a tourist industry. If you are in the area, I recommend coming out and trying McKay's ice cream. You'll see it on the top right there in the photos. It's usually packed. With COVID, it's been less busy, but I'm sure that line will come back when things get back to normal. So we joined the PCP program in 2004 with a population of just over 12,000. We first completed Milestone 1 by creating a baseline emissions inventory and forecast. We did our corporate one, which was very extensive. I wasn't there at the time, but it really looked at everything, even the fuel consumption of employees traveling to work. We also did the community, working with energy providers in our area, and was able to look at a baseline as well as do some forecasting. So with that, we moved to Milestone 2, setting those emission reduction targets, looking to reduce by 20% for our corporate. So what we do across the town with our operations, admin, there, as well as looking at 6% reduction in the community away from our 1990 levels by 2014. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to keep on track with this and actually look at, did we meet those targets for 2014? We did in 2007 create our local action plan. It outlines a number of initiatives. I'll go into a few in my next slide, but I just want to highlight that we really didn't, in Milestone 4, we did implement a lot of things from the action plan, but we were missing from Milestone 5, where you monitor the progress and actually show the results. A plan is great, but if you don't keep coming back to it and treating it like a living document, it doesn't do much other than kind of just show a glimpse of the past. So looking at Milestone 3, for our local action plan, what we've completed following as a result of the PCP program was a water conservation program. This one really focuses on annual community education and engagement. We also give rebates for water conservation. We created our Cochrane Sustainability Plan. It's the second highest order plan right after our municipal development plan. It outlines how we're going to meet our targets, be sustainable. It shows a 10 to 50 year vision for our community, and it's really a guidance for all of our plans, policies, and programs that we create when it comes to sustainability. From this and the PCP program, we developed our zero waste framework. What that looks to do is that when it was created in 2012, we were able to not send 20% of our waste to the landfill. Our target is to actually get that up to 80% by 2020. We haven't made it there yet. We are going to work with our waste and recycling team to see where we are with that target. We did create an organics program, which significantly helped us reduce our waste. We're also looking at a biofuel program to use the organics we collect, dehydrate, and burn it as a fuel, hopefully to use it with our rec center. We also created the green building strategy, which outlines sustainable building practices, and then a renewable energy framework outlining how we are to use renewable energy and outfit it on facilities and where it can be used in the community. And in 2009, where I came in, we implemented COLT, or Cochrane On Demand Local Transit. It's the first fully on-demand stop-to-stop local transit service. It's been met by a ton of support. So actually where we're now moving towards is an integration with a regional service, which will have a significant impact on reducing our GHGs from commuters. So that'll, even just getting a small percent of that, over 50% of Cochrane residents who commute into Calgary will have some significant savings. So that's come from an integration with our COLT service and looking at combining with Southland Transportation's On-It service, which connects to Calgary. We'll be connecting to the Brentwood LRT station, University of Calgary, SAIT, downtown Calgary, Foothills Hospital, and looking at Banff in the summer months. Another important part to note is we've done some lighting and HVAC retrofits. A key one was switching roughly 4,000 of our streetlights to LED, working with Fortis. And then part of our life cycling, we've actually been changing to LED, upgrading our HVAC, and we've had significant savings there, but it was never really monitored. It was kind of just done in the process of our facilities work, and we weren't able to actually put this into the targets. And you'll see I'll kind of show some of our benchmarking through the MEM program, where once you start looking at this, it actually is great and you can celebrate it. So moving to the MEM program, it's offered through the Municipal Climate Change Action Center. It's a grant-funded program offering 80% of the salary for the MEM position. You get consulting from Clear Result, great company to work with. They provide excellent templates. I often, when I have a question, I send an email. They usually have a response back before I thought I even hit send. So it's great to have their support. And then you get benchmarking software. So using RetScreen Expert, provided through National Resources Canada. That really helps with your benchmarking and forecasting, especially when we're looking at some of our renewable energy and sustainability projects. Through the program, we also set goals that really were focused first on facilities, but now we're looking at ways of tying it into some larger schemes with the PCP program. Another great part is that reporting and monitoring. So by getting the templates, the frameworks, the software to do it, we can actually see what we're doing and actually report those results. We've also got some funding. We have our council gave $250,000 to go towards implementing some of these projects, with first focusing on low and no cost or quick ROIs, and then actually we're going to look at using that return on investment money and getting it back from council to invest in larger projects. So that's kind of our staged approach. I really like the quote from MCCAC where it's save money, save the planet. It's a win-win. We agree with that here at the Town of Cochrane. So we did our benchmarking for the first 6 facilities we looked at. It's our admin building, fire hall, front and back operations shops, public library, and our eco center. It was something that, again, we weren't monitoring. So this baseline here, that's from 2018, looking at 2019, we actually had significant energy use reduction through some LED lighting upgrades, as well as changes to our HVAC, and even the contract we had for how we were purchasing it, power. We've had significant savings, but they weren't really looked at. And now when we go to council in a time where municipalities are asked to do the same or more with less funding, it's a great way to show that, hey, look, we actually saved the value of a position here. And that's what we've done from 2018 to 2019. And then we're actually planning with our MEM program for 2020 to even save it as much for another position. Another great part that you get from the MEM program is the benchmarking. They really help with giving information and tangible results. We're often dealing with people who are not energy experts or deal with energy other than they get a utility bill and they pay it, but actually putting it in tangibles, taking it out of kilowatts or tons of CO2 and actually putting it into things like number of homes to operate a vehicle. This is much better for engaging with our staff and community. So this takes us to our engagement campaign. We're focused on creating a culture of efficiency. We first were saying energy, but now we actually changed it to consumption reduction. So we established our consumption reduction team, put it out to all of our staff. Who is ever interested could be a part of the team. We got people who are very passionate from all different backgrounds, from finance, GIS, operations, all over our organization. And they're all going to be able to provide their insight, learn, and provide their passion. So it really gives us that different perspective. They're also going to become champions in their department so that they can actually help their team identify and reduce and report energy waste or just even consumption waste in general. And we're going to actually try and allow staff to set their own targets and metrics so that they can identify ways of reducing their consumption. So what we have there is on the right with that image of a CO2. We put that by our lights. That was out of the PCP program. It's a great thing. It looks nice, but we really have to go more than just putting that on a wall and thinking that the culture is going to change. We really have to have people adopt it. It's much easier for someone to go and say, hey, I could probably take away my space heater under my desk and voluntarily give that up, rather than us going around trying to turn off the lights behind everyone or wagging our finger at everybody, trying to get them to change. So it's about kind of engaging, getting that that cultural shift by actually getting people involved in the process. So we'll allow them to set their own goals. We'll be sharing ongoing feedback and support, and making sure it's in metrics that people can actually understand, so they actually know what they've done. And we'll look at celebrating with some rewards too for meeting your targets, and being understandable that each department will have different levels on how much they can reduce. Our IT department has quite a bit of room versus maybe finance has less, but even small changes, these low no cost changes are significant if we have a whole organization on board. Moving forward, looking to actually expand this culture into the community. And this is what really ties in with connecting the Partners for Climate Protection to actually go back to what we had set with these targets. So when we look at integrating, we have the PCP program, which was a lot more holistic, looked at a larger scale, and the MEM program was quite focused on just facilities. We're actually going to try and utilize the existing targets from the our local action plan and utilize the MEM monitoring reporting to actually tie those together. It is tricky working with a document from 2007 from the PCP program, but we're going to try and update that, get it tied in to today, and look at, hey, how far have we made it on this our local action plan so far, celebrate the wins that we have, look where we have to go. A key part is also having that executive support. So we've gotten buy-in from the CAO as well as all the managers, so that when we did this consumption reduction team, they were all aware of it. They were promoting their staff to take part and just kind of explaining it too, to get that buy-in as well. And that's really key to the internal staff engagement, is really having everybody feel like they have a choice in it. It's not we're coming through, turning off the lights, and it's also making it clear there's not a race to who can work in the dark or work in the cold. It's about combining efficiency and comfort. So we've also moved to working with community partnerships. So Cochrane High School Sustainable Development Committee is an extracurricular group here in Cochrane. So there's students who don't get any credit for this class, but they're passionate. They've been doing this for the past 20 years. They're actually the leader in renewable energy in Cochrane. They've done 3 phases of solar power on their school, all fundraised by themselves, a small wind turbine, a little community garden. They're doing rain collection. So students have a real great passion. Rather than try and create, to go out and try and recreate that somewhere, we're utilizing groups who are already passionate about this, who want to go out in the community and actually help and facilitate this. From our side, moving from where we had the PCP program, taking it from the edge of someone's desk where we had a planner working on it, to having the MEM person who can dedicate the time, and as well as we have council dedicating funding to initiatives, is a real key part. It can't be, it has to be a priority for council and as well as for our staff. And a key part of this also is that ongoing monitoring, as well as recognition and making sure that everything's accessible. A 200-page report is great for someone in technical terms, for someone who's very technical. We also have to make sure what we're putting out can be understood by our staff and our community, and making sure that we're actually constantly going back and working with it. We only made it to Milestone 3 so far. We're now looking at integrating, making it to Milestone 4, and with the MEM program. And then understanding that Milestone 5 isn't the end point, but it's actually, again, just this process where we go back, we look at our targets, we look at, did we meet them, how do we adjust, setting action plans again, and then monitoring. So that concludes my portion of the presentation. I think we're available for question. I'll pass it back over to Ronick.
Thanks, Devin. That was great. I'm just going to throw you back on mute for a second. Yeah, so that does bring us to the end of our presentation here. I'd welcome any questions for folks that for either myself or for Devin. I do want to thank Devin for presenting today. I know it's not easy to be honest about what has happened, but it's great to hear about your initiatives, and I really appreciate you talking about how a plan is really a living document, and there has to be an effort in place to kind of always be adapting it and working at it while making sure that we do report on initiatives. Yeah, so for those of you that may have questions, I'll encourage you to type them into the chat box. You can always follow up after the webinar, and you have our direct contact info here for myself and Devin. So there is a way for you to address a question not here while everyone else is listening. There also is a case study that we wrote about Cochrane. So if you'd like to learn a little bit more about Cochrane, follow up on all the links that Devin did share. You can follow the blog post, and I'll make sure to include it in our post-webinar email. And yeah, that email will also include a copy of the slides, so you'll have access to the information that was shared today. Yes, I'm not seeing any questions, but maybe I'll just I'll share that there'll be an evaluation form afterward as well. And if you can provide any feedback there, that would be great. It can help direct not only the content of upcoming webinars, but also the delivery. If there's different things that you want to see or talk about, please let us know, and I'll make sure that we do address them at some point. I also do want to maybe take the time to just quickly talk about the PCP program itself. So next week for members, we do have a community of practice meeting. So this is an opportunity for members to meet each other, talk to each other, and share some share some knowledge on what's happening in the world of municipal climate change action. I know next week we're going to mainly talk about COVID, as that's been on the front of everyone's mind this first half of the year. And we'll talk a little bit more about COVID and climate action at this meeting. So that is a way for you to learn more about the program and climate actions from each other. Yeah, if there aren't any questions, maybe I'll just, Devin, do you have any last minute things you wanted to say?
Yeah, if anybody's kind of curious about either the PCP program, MEM, I'm happy to talk about it or speak with you. My contact info is there. I think energy, when we look at these kind of programs, it's a great way for you to go to your council, show how we can invest a bit of money. We get this return on investment, and actually we're saving money there forward. So it's one of the few times you'll spend money and it's like a boomerang, it comes back to you. That's what my facilities manager always likes to say, and that seems to work well. So these are great programs. It's a lot of support for setting those targets and actually being able to move forward with them. You just have to be able to dedicate the time for it.
Awesome, thanks, Devin. It's definitely good to hear that from you, and thank you once again for joining us today. Yeah, I think that'll be all for today. So thank you all for coming today, and I hope that the information presented was interesting and valuable to you. And we'll see you in the next webinar.